Hi, I'm Renee Tucci, and today we're going to create a Flemish style floral design featuring the reflexing technique. Flemish style floral design is a massed composition reminiscent of the Dutch and Flemish paintings that you would see from the 16th and 17th century. They're usually abundant with many different varieties and colors of flowers. They highlight different features of the flowers. It's not unusual to see flowers that are somewhat senescing, just all types of flowers, branches, grasses, blooms in a way that they can really be appreciated. So today I've started our design by prepping this beautiful compote with some floral foam. I have done a layer of clear tape across the foam and then around the brim of the compote just to make sure our mechanics are sound. I am going to start by creating a line in our design with these pussy willow branches. It is springtime now and they are abundant. I love the texture that the pussy willow brings to any design, and of course you can't go wrong when it's used to create a line in a design because it does just that. It moves the eye from the tip of the branch down into the center of the arrangement where your eye can rest on the focal point of the design, the focal area, the hero flower, whatever you want to call it. So let's add in our pussy willow. Okay, now I've got my pussy willow added into here, and I even have some branches coming out the front of the design. I've got different groupings of them. The front facing branches are really creating a lot of depth. So if I turn this on its side, you can really see how deep those go, which will help us establish a strong focal area. Now the next flower I'm going to place is this beautiful Phalaenopsis orchid stem. I actually cut this from my orchids in my home studio. So one of the benefits of living in my house, if you're an orchid, is that you get cut when you bloom and you get enjoyed in a fresh flower design. So I'm going to go ahead and add this in that focal area. This is a really important flower to me for this design because if you look carefully at the orchid itself, you'll see the tonations are so varied and they fade, they ombre in and out. We've got shades of orange, pink, peach, even to cream and white in the very center of their throat. And so this is what I'm going to use. Let me put this towards the camera. This is what I'm going to use to help develop my color palette. All of the colors within this orchid are going to be represented with all of the flowers, the abundant amount of flowers that I place into my design here. So I'm going to place that right center, just like that, arching out a bit so it can really be enjoyed. Now let's start to add a few other flowers that will finish this off. So I've got an entire bunch of tulips here, and they are at room temperature, which means their leaves are I hate to use the word floppy, but they're floating in the wind, which I love. Tulips can really be playful and again help create the line of how the eye moves through the design. Some of the lower down leaves on the tulip I'm going to go ahead and remove. But the upper tulip leaves, as long as they're in good shape, not chewed or ripped or bruised, I'm going to leave those in there. And I'm going to follow the line of what I started with the pussy willow. And I'm going to add some other lines for the eye to follow. And these might bisect the original line, and that's okay. Flemish design is really all about just, again, an abundance, flowers everywhere, spilling out, hanging over, and tulips are the perfect item to use to establish that. Okay, we've added a few tulips in. Now with the last 5 tulips that I have, I want to reflex their heads, open them up and allow them to be more showy. So the technique of reflexing simply refers to rolling back the petals of a flower and allowing it to take up more space or to have a more open appearance. And this is most often done with tulips and roses. So you simply take the petals of your flower, take your forefinger and thumb, and very gently roll back the petal and invert the petal. So down at the base of the petal where it meets the stem, that's where you want to carefully with your thumb push it open, invert it, and allow it to become big and showy. So these kinds of tulips are often seen in Flemish paintings where they're showing that center area of the tulip, the stamens. There we go. We've made it all the way to the center here, and now you can see that those black stamens, really beautiful. I will say that the tip for these is that the tulips need to be room temperature. If the petals are cold, they will snap and tear when you try to reflex them. So just make sure your tulips or whatever flower you're reflexing is at room temperature. Next up, we're going to add in a few stems of hellebore that I've also cut from my garden. They are perfect this time of year. I'm putting them in next because they have pretty thick stems, so I want to make sure they get a good spot in that floral foam real estate. And I'm going to anchor them close to the foam to bring in some depth. So we've got the tulips arching out, and we're going to anchor the hellebore closer into the foam. Next up, nothing says spring more than daffodils. These daffodils are just on the brink of bursting open. I'm going to go ahead and add these in next, again earlier to mid on in the composition because they have very soft stems. So I want to make sure I have good access to that floral foam and get a good insertion there. I'm actually going to group these together just over here, just off center of our design, and we're going to leave them all together. The daffodils are going to be balanced with a grouping of another spring flower, a white anemone. This is the panda variety that has that iconic dark center to it. And this works in our color palette because, as you remember in the beginning, I talked about how all the way at the center of our star orchid here is a creamy white throat. So it still works in our palette. And I'm going to group these together over here to balance the paler color of the helleborus and the daffodil on this side. Next up, to bring in some of the pinks that we see in our orchid, I've got some baby pink carnations and some magenta pink Sweet William, which are also in the dianthus or carnation family. I'm going to anchor these in closer, tighter into the foam just to add some color depth and to help cover our mechanics. Our design is really filling in now. Next up, I'm going to add some bells of Ireland up here among where our pussy willow are, just to strengthen that line and to bring some more depth up to the top area of the design. And then I've got some bright pink Matsumoto asters, crown asters, that are going to get added in as well. I have a few lilies to add in next. I've purposely left the pollen on them to allow that brown tonation to complement the orange of the tulips. And they're not perfect. These lilies are showing a little bit of bruising, and again, some of that senescence that I talked about in the beginning of the video, where the flowers, some of them are starting to fade, and that's okay. That's how they depicted them in the Flemish paintings. So I'm going to go with it. We're going to add the pink lilies in to add some depth to our three-sided design. Okay, it's time for the finishing touches. We're going to drip a little bit of this hanging green amaranthus out the front of our design, and we're going to finish covering our mechanics with a little bit of greenery. Here I've got some Israeli ruscus. Okay, here's our finished Flemish design. I stuck to plan and I had some of the amaranthus drip out the front, but I added to plan and playfully allowed two of the stems to come out and over the top and to dangle on some of the lilies and daffodils that are on the front there. I finished with some Israeli ruscus to cover our mechanics in the back and to allow some of that deep emerald green to contrast off of the brighter colors in the front. I hope you've enjoyed this Flemish design and that you've learned a tipper technique and that you go out and create.